Right, hello folks. I am coming back with a pretty big video. So this is the second episode or whatever of the Forgotten Defenders of the Homefront series, and this time we're going to be looking at what I consider the unsung heroes of the defence of the UK, and these were the National Defence Companies and the Home Defence Battalions. So these were initially called the National Defence Companies, and were then built up to battalion level and renamed the Home Defence Battalions. So these were the unsung heroes of the UK defence of the UK during the Second World War. As always, I'm using a script, so yeah, there might be a couple of places where I get lost in the text. There's a shed load of information to get through. So the role of this unit is pretty much completely unknown today. With the Home Defence Battalions themselves often mistaken for the Home Guard. So everyone knows about the Home Guard. Very few people, if any, know about the role of the Home Defence Battalions. In fact, the Home Defence Battalions were actually the soldiers responsible for doing most of the defence tasks which people think the Home Guard were responsible of doing today. But what you won't ever see is people, talking about these units. You'll never see a sitcom made about them, and you'll also never see any reenactors portraying them. Despite them being one of the most important units defending the UK at the time of their formation. So, the aim of this talk is to provide an overview of this unit, their formation, and their historic role in defending the UK during the Second World War using primary sources. The National Defence Companies / Home Defence Battalions have not been the subject of much research at all, as far as I can see. Even their Wikipedia page, which I checked as I was struggling for information, is extremely vague, and there is even some inconsistency with what they were actually called on the Wikipedia page, so it's ridiculous. So Wikipedia calls the later units Home Service Battalions, while the primary sources I've found call them National Defence Companies, which were later formed into Home Defence Battalions. So I'll be using the information from the primary sources, not Wikipedia, for obvious reasons. So yeah, I'll be using these terms in the presentation. So they're quite a bit of a mouthful, but I'll try and keep things consistent. So, this is an image of an old soldier posing as a member of the National Defence Company. And when you look closely at him, this got me thinking that, he looks very much like Corporal Jones. And even his helmet is potentially a First World War vintage helmet with a raw rim. Anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, he looks more like Corporal Jones than Corporal Jones does. But as we'll see, the experience of the National Defence Companies and Home Defence Battalions is very similar to that portrayed in Dad's Army. The main difference being that the NDCs and the HDBs were actually full-time soldiers with an actual responsibility for defence of the UK in 1940 and 41, unlike the Home Guard at this time. But yeah, that really did make me laugh. And he's even got the medals too, so it does make me wonder. It made me question whether Jimmy Perry and David Croft actually mixed up Dad's, the Home Guard with the Home Defence Battalions themselves, and the entire series of, the entire program of Dad's Army was meant to actually look at the Home Defence Battalions and not the Home Guard. But yeah, that's a little conspiracy theory for you, right? So, as always with this stuff, I've intended and I've decided I want to focus on primary sources, the actual sources of information, and these will be referenced at the bottom of each slide where I've used them. For this presentation, I've consulted the trusty war diaries that I have available to me at the time of writing, as well as Hansard. So this is the official report of parliamentary debates. I was really struggling with the research of this video, and on my way to work one day, it just clicked that I could look at Hansard to see what information there was, because sometimes you find information relating to the war in parliamentary debates, and I was relatively lucky with that. So yeah, I'm using Hansard quite a bit. So yeah, also in the talk, I'll use the term Home Defence Battalions as much as possible, just for ease of reference during this presentation. But I'm using this as an umbrella term to also cover the National Defence Companies, which were a precursor to the Home Defence Battalions. So, who were the NDCs and Home Defence Battalions? Well, the National Defence Companies themselves were formed in the pre-war period. The unit was to consist initially of men, ideally ex-servicemen, aged between the ages of 45 and 51, and this age range would later be amended to between 41 and 51. This poster here, which dates to November 1939, is a recruitment poster, and we'll also see AirSats Corporal Jones there, once again, within the images. So, according to this poster, members would serve for 4 years with the possibility of re-engagement. Volunteers would receive a £5 bounty, which was about 350 quid today, as well as expenses and pay at the army rates. They would be full-time soldiers. The national defence companies were also affiliated with their local territorial army units, so they were let's say an echelon of the territorial army, and would be organised along similar lines. So, like I say, as I've struggled to find information, let's try and piece together how the Home Defence Battalions and National Defence Companies were formed and their initial history. As I mentioned earlier, they have not been the subject of much research at all, which is absolutely appalling, given that they were responsible for defending pretty much the entirety of the UK. As a result, I struggled to put this video together until the other day, like I say, when I remembered that Hansard exists, and I've used this as a primary source. So, the national defence companies were first discussed or debated in Parliament on the 21st of July 1936, and the issue of raising the NDCs was first raised in Parliament on this day. So on this date, the entry here, Territorial Force National Defence Companies, outlines that a Mr. Smedley Crook asked the Secretary of State for War whether he has yet reached any decision on the question of forming a national defence force. So Mr. Cooper responded with, "Yes, sir. It seems to me to be anomalous that responsibility of home defence should be shared by the Territorial Army and a body not fully identified with it, namely the Royal Defence Corps. And I've decided, therefore, that the Royal Defence Corps shall be replaced by National Defence Companies of the Territorial Army. The companies will be formed on a county or in some cases a city basis, and each will be linked with a territorial infantry battalion. Enrolment, which will start on the 1st of September next year, so 1937, will be open in peace to ex-members of His Majesty's forces, normally between the ages of 45 and 60 years, who express themselves as willing to be commissioned or enlisted for home service in a local national defence company when required. The role of the new force will be to protect important points in Great Britain when war is threatening or has actually broken out, but members of the force will not be called up until these conditions arise, nor will they be called upon up on account of civil disturbance. A total of approximately 8,450 officers and men distributed among the various counties in Great Britain will be required, and I have every confidence that I shall have no difficulty in securing this number of men in a very short time. I have indeed been most gratified by the general interest taken in matters of national defence, as evinced, is that a word, by the numerous letters containing offers of help or suggestions which I've received, and I should like to take this opportunity of thanking all those who have assisted me in this way, particularly in this matter of the National Defence Companies, my honourable friend, the member for Durrytend, Mr. Smedley Crook." And then it goes on to, they debate a bit about, so Mr. Smedley Crook comes back with, "Is my right honourable friend aware that the announcement which he has just made will give widespread satisfaction?" And then a Mr. Mabane, "Can my right honourable friend say why the lower age limit is as high as 45? Mr. Cooper responds with, "It is thought that anybody under that age who has served in the forces will be serving in some branch of the forces today. I am quite prepared to make exceptions should it be advisable to do so." And then Mr. Logan responds with, "When this National Defence Force is set up, will the right honourable gentleman ask those gentlemen who enlist whether, should war break out, they will give active service in less than 4 years after the war has taken place?" And there's no response recorded there. So, the National Defence Companies were further debated on the 13th of November 1936 in relation to inland revenue clerks. So a Mr. Maxwell asked the financial secretary, to the Treasury whether he is aware that certain clerks of the Inland Revenue Office in King's Lynn have been refused permission to join the National Defence Corps, as he calls it, not National Defence Companies, and whether this decision has been can be reconsidered. So the Financial Secretary of the Treasury, which is Lieutenant Colonel Colville, states that the answer to the first part of the question is in the affirmative. Members of the National Defence Companies, as he corrects there, must be over 45 or unfit for active service and are not liable for any service or training except on the threat of or during war. It would be possible for departments to decide in advance of such an emergency which members of their staff, being over 45 or unfit for active service, could be spared for service with the companies, and which could more usefully be employed in the machinery of civil government. In these circumstances, it has been decided that it would not be desirable for departments to grant permission. So I'm going to say that's grant permission, it's a typo, to the members of their staff to join the companies. Mr. Maxwell responded with, does my right honourable friend not think it very undesirable for government departments that government departments should be thought of to be discouraging recruitment in any way whatever? And Lieutenant Colonel Colville responded with, I quite agree, but the honourable member should consider that these corps are recruited not for active service but for home duty, and that in any emergency it is most important to maintain the machinery of civil government. Yeah, and then Sir Austin Chamberlain raises that, does my honourable friend think it possible for manufacturers, for instance, or other employers of labour to come to a decision in their own case when the government says it is possible? And then Lieutenant Colville responds with, I think the answer which I gave in relation to the importance of maintenance of civil government fully covers the point. To which Sir Austin Chamberlain quite arsely says, no, it does not. The point is not answered, which I thought was quite funny. Right. Coming towards the point where war had actually been declared, so on the 26th of September 1940, the issue of reducing the lower age bracket from 45 to 41 was debated in relation to the national defence companies. So at this time, war has been declared and has been going for about a year now. Colonel Ponsonby asked the Secretary of State for War whether he is aware that, owing to the high payments to air raid precautions personnel and the low rates of pay offered to the older men who comprise the national defence companies, recruitment for the latter has been most unsatisfactory. Whether he will lower and as a result of this, whether he will lower the age limit from 45 to 41 and remove the higher age limit so that so as to include fit older men who now come under no category, and whether he will make any statements as to improve conditions so as to ensure increased personnel for the national defence companies and relieve territorial army units of now guarding vulnerable points. A Mr. Horbelish, who is relatively well known, stated that I have in contemplation a change in the present method of manning vulnerable points. So, as we'll see in a bit, this age bracket was lowered from 45 to 41. And the top end age bracket was also amended to include fit older men. As a result of a lot of people joining the ARP because of their high wage that they received. Right. So, and just a bit more. I don't know why I've come back to 1939, but I have. So. No, this isn't in chronological order because I found this and I thought it was quite funny. So this debate on the 3rd of October 1939 isn't massively relevant, but I love this this statement for Sir Ralph Glynn, and he asked the Secretary of State for War whether recruiting for the national defence companies remains open and whether any special steps are now taken since the recruiting was removed from territorial army associations to ensure that no undesirable characters are enlisted. So that made me laugh. I thought I'd chuck that in. Okay. So, the national defence companies were further discussed on the 27th of February 1940 in regards to overseas service for the members of the Home Defence Battalions, Home Defence units, sorry. So Miss Rathbone outlined that they asked the Secretary of State for War whether men over the age for registration who have voluntarily joined up before or after the outbreak of war for home defence only are compelled to accompany their units if they go overseas. So, like I say, they were attached to local territorial army unit, and territorial army units had the potential of being sent abroad for fighting. Obviously, in 27th of February 1940, things hadn't quite kicked off in Europe just yet. So, are they compelled to accompany their units if they go overseas? And if not, what steps should they take if they desire to secure transfer to other units? Mr. Stanley responded with, if a man who is not enlisted or subsequently accepted a liability for general service is ordered overseas, he should report the facts to his commanding officer. He will not then be sent overseas and will, if necessary, be transferred to another unit at home. So there was this possibility if the associated unit was going to be deployed abroad, members volunteers who had enlisted under the proviso of the Home Defence scheme, Home Defence Company's National Defence Battalion scheme, could request to be transferred to another unit to continue their service at home. Okay. So one final, I think this is the final one. So national defence companies were further discussed in Parliament on the 30th of July 1940, and this was in relation to serving in their own locality, so trying to keep these people who volunteered for the NDCs local. So a Mr. Lyons asked the Secretary of State for War to what extent men who enlist in the national defence companies are employed in their own localities, whether he is aware that in certain instances older men of this corps, notwithstanding age and their lower medical categories, are on training and duties with young men recently joined for general service, and whether in view of the object of original National Defence Company's enlistments he can take steps to offer transfer to their own localities for these older men to serve together and thus replace younger general servicemen who are there stationed for defence purposes. Mr. Eden, which I'm guessing is Anthony Eden, stated then, men who enlisted in national defence companies undertook, by the terms of their enlistment, to serve wherever called upon in the United Kingdom. But every effort is made to enable such men to serve their own homes so far as military requirements allow. The younger men are, as a rule, in separate companies. It would not be practicable to arrange any general system of transfer, but I shall be glad to consider any particular case that brought to my notice. So that's really interesting that in some cases the older men who'd signed up for the NDCs were signed up under the awareness that they could be deployed across the UK, but it was raised that it was practical to have them keep them in their own locality. So that was interesting. Right. So slide 11. This poster causes a lot of problems. So it is worth me pointing out this poster is used so often for Home Guard stuff, despite having nothing to do with the Home Guard. It pops up everywhere and is, used as Home Guard when it clearly isn't. So I suspect people just see the word home and instantly think Home Guard. This is a Home Defence Battalion recruitment poster. You can see, he's wearing 37 Pat Webbin, SMLE, and he's also on an airfield, defending an airfield, which was not something the Home Guard did. So, what was the role of the Home Defence Battalions? Well, pretty much doing anything that people think the Home Guard did in 1940 and 41. The Home Defence Battalions would defend what were termed vulnerable points in the UK. This had the additional aim of freeing up territorial army to do frontline service and home defence duties, which in the event of an invasion would mean they would be the primary means of defence. The term vulnerable point itself is a very broad term that I struggle to say often, but it includes everything from military factories and depots through to military infrastructure, vulnerable road and rail bridges, RFA, airfields and landing grounds, and literally any other location that is vulnerable to sabotage or attack that didn't necessarily need defending by frontline capable soldiers. Again, this is what many people, pretty much everyone, thinks the Home Guard were doing in 1940 in particular, and later in 1941. But this is the role undertaken by the Home Defence Battalions of the Territorial Army, which were a branch of the Territorial Army, and also full-time soldiers, and not Home Guard, and not less than part-time civilians. Right. So this summary of the role here was issued on the 12th of December 1939 and was written by D.F. Anderson, who was the Major General of General Staff within the General Headquarters Home Forces. And I'm going to try and read this off a rather blurry screen, but so the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces is very anxious that all ranks who are engaged in the protection of vulnerable points should realise that they are carrying out a task of national importance. Again, nationally important role that goes overlooked today in light of this Home Guard centric view. So the efficient performance of which is a very real contribution to the successful prosecution of war. The ultimate intention, so skipping a bit, if you want to pause this, you can read it then. The ultimate intention is that the Home Defence Battalions, as I've already said, should provide all the guards at points where military protection is required. Until these units reach the required strength, a number of guards must continue to be found by units of the Field Army, so the Regulars and Territorial Army. The Commander-in-Chief fully appreciates the disappointment of all those who, while anxious to devote their energies to training for overseas, find that they are temporarily required for guard duty. He should, however, like stress that they are carrying out a task which has to be done and whose successful and efficient performance requires a very high standard of efficiency. So it does outline here that there is a bit of frustration with the field force or the regs and TAs having to guard stuff, but they're doing a vitally important job that cannot be avoided. So in conclusion, the Commander-in-Chief of Home Forces would like the above remarks to be Communicated to all members of the Field Army, National Defence Companies and Home Defence Battalions who are or have been engaged in guarding vulnerable points, so that they may realise that both their efforts and their difficulties are appreciated. The measure of their success lies in the fact that that up to the present, no serious cause of sabotage, so no serious cases of sabotage have occurred. So again, making it vitally clear here that the role of the National Defence Company's Home Defence Battalions was of national importance, and today is completely forgotten. And this was in December 1939 as well, a whole 5 months before the Home Guard were even formed. Right. So we'll take a look at this particular document later, but this is a list of vulnerable points across Norfolk that the 8th Home Defence Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment defended in May 1941. I've concealed some of the locations so as to avoid people screenshotting and nicking the data without putting any effort into finding this. If you want to get this document, go to the National Archives and get it yourself. So yeah, I've blurred this out to make the document largely unusable, just to frustrate people. But you can see there are a vast range of vulnerable points allotted to this one battalion. You know, everything from Galston Pier and Haysborough, so the coastal area of Haysborough, through to Ormsby Waterworks. There's Rackheath, which is the airfields, and a whole range of things. You've got Stoke Holy Cross in there, which was the radar station, whole range of things. And you've also got the Cambridge area headquarters were guarded by these national defence companies. So this just covers Norfolk. If you consider the entirety of the UK, there would have been a vast number of vulnerable points. Each vulnerable point as well was predetermined and had its own serial number assigned to it, generally prefixed with an N. Though some of these ones down here, such as Santon Downham, for example, is prefixed by a C, and I'm not sure what the reason for that is. So we'll come back to this later, but you can see there's a vast range of vulnerable points allocated to this one Home Defence Battalion. So let's take a look at the 8th Home Defence Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, and these are one of the Home Defence units in my area of research, which I've done quite a bit of work with. This unit was mobilised on the 23rd of August 1939, so about a month before war was even declared, with the officers appointed starting the process. So the officers were called up and mobilised and appointed the process, or starting the process of recruitment of the unit. So gathering these volunteers who'd signed up pre-war to undertake this role, they had to be gathered again and brought into the unit. So the 8th Battalion, 8th Home Defence Battalion were responsible for quite a large area comprising the entirety of Norfolk and also some defence of the Cambridge area as well. So let me just make sure I'm on the right slide. I am. Interestingly, on the 27th of August 1939, this bounty of £5, which I think was 240 quid today, this bounty, known as a recruitment gratuity, ceased at midnight on the 23rd and 24th of August 1939. And as a result of this had a serious impact on recruitment, according to the 8th Battalion. This £5 gratuity was one of the key benefits promoted during the recruitment campaign, as we saw in the poster from November 1939. I think it was November. No, anyway, that poster that I showed you early. But interestingly enough, it was halted and seriously impacted recruitment for the 8th Battalion. Okay. So by the end of August 1939, still before war had been declared, the unit itself was actually coming together quite nicely. The unit was affiliated with both the 4th and 5th Battalions of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, which were the Territorial Army Regiment under 18th Division of the Home Forces, 18th Infantry Division, which were part of the Home Forces. The 5th Battalion of the Royal Norfolks actually promised 34 rifles to the 8th Battalion as well, which a battalion is meant to be about 800 troops. 34 rifles isn't going to go very far, but it's better than nothing. By this time, the unit itself comprised of 20 platoons with 30 officers and 745 other ranks, so a relatively sizable unit. And again, 34 rifles, they'd be doing a lot of sharing, but this is one of those things that is attributed to the Home Guard, but was clearly happening way before the Home Guard were formed with the Home Defence Battalions. Each company of the 8th Battalion Royal Norfolks were actually formed for a specific defensive task, which is what I find quite interesting, is that each was formed purely with a very specific defence task to be undertaken. As we'll see later, this may be one of the reasons why once these companies were assigned a specific set of defensive tasks, that they stuck to them for over 2 years. So it's interesting to see that. So By September, so upon the declaration of war, cracks were starting to show, especially when it comes to supply. Supply became an extremely serious issue for the battalion. On the 1st of September 1939, the unit could not gather stationery, forms, books or manuals, or even get itself any of the attestation forms for signing up new recruits. Also, on this date, all the procurement of boots for the unit has started. On the next day, 2nd of September 1939, war was declared. By the 3rd of September, so literally the day after war was declared, 6 vulnerable points were being guarded. I'm just going to call them VPs, it's easier for me to say, were being guarded by the battalion. So less than 24 hours after war was declared, 6 VPs were under the defence of the battalion, and the battalion had also started defending and guarding vulnerable points. VPs, I need to say, before this point. On the 9th of September, serious issues were being encountered with the provision of greatcoats, and simply none were available. Soldiers, as a result, were permitted to wear their own clothes, including their own winter wear, as a result of this. By this time, the unit was also tied up with anti-sabotage duty, and it was decided that another 100 men would be required to undertake this role. Although weapons had been received, accoutrements, as it calls them, had not been received. So things like rifle slings, bayonet frogs, and belts had not been received, and had to be improvised by the battalion from clothes rope. So, like the rope that ties up like a dressing gown or similar had to be used to improvise rifle slings. And this is one thing I was really tempted to get into, like reenactment, to portray this, portray the this period of the 8th Battalion, or 8th Home Defence Battalion. But the two downsides are I've got a beard and I'm not shaving the sodding thing off. Anyway, but yeah, I'd really like to reenact this specific period to show the Home Defence Battalions and what they would have looked like in this period. The battalion in September 1939 also took on its first airfield defence role, with 1 officer and 27 other ranks taking on the defence of RAF Watton. Guards were already on duty at 6 vulnerable points, VPs in the battalion's area of responsibility, as I've already mentioned. Later in the month, the unit was still struggling to source stuff, so welly boots, overcoats, respirators, helmets and torches were next to non-existent, and they were struggling to find these key items. At this time as well, it was noted that the unit was spread across an extremely wide area and largely scattered in small detachments. Rations were scarce, with the units deployed in airfields on airfield defence having to draw rations and mess facilities out of their own subsistence allowance, and others in the units had to rely on rations provided in kind. That is despicable, really, isn't it? The unit also had no utensils and no cooks. No transport was available except for officers' own vehicles, and these were being run at their own expense. These officers were also transporting troops of the battalion across the county to allow them to be deployed to their VPs, or their relevant VPs. So it gives you an idea of how dire the situation was upon the declaration of war for this Home Defence Battalion. Of interest as well is on October 1939, the rules of engagements for the units were clarified on the 5th of October, with the unit being authorised to fire on aircraft only when they commit a hostile act or have been confirmed to be hostile. Guards on VPs would be provided with 50 rounds of ammunition for each rifle, so I thought that was useful to put in. As winter approached, the overcoat situation continued to be going badly. Greatcoats were wanted badly, and as winter approached, this would obviously become a key issue for the troops. They would not have winter clothing as winter approached, and this continued to be an issue. So on the by January 1940, supply issues continued. Although the battalion now had 800 steel helmets, it only had 71 respirators. As in comparison, still no rifle slings were available, so I'm guessing they were still using bits of clothing rope to create slings for the rifles. Chargers for holding bullets, so these are often called clips today, but they were officially called chargers in the British Army at the time. So chargers for holding bullets and loading rifles were completely absent, but were desperately needed. As a result, the use of loose rounds led to slow loading and losses of ammunition. The ammunition pouches, which have been issued to the units, I'm guessing these are 37 pack, because the universal pouches are quite deep. got some behind me, you probably won't be able to see them. But if you're storing loose rounds in those, you've got to really reach in to get them. And these were unsuitable for storing loose rounds. So soldiers of the battalion had adopted just keeping the ammunition in the pockets of their uniforms or in their battle dress trouser pockets. So we'll look at the VPs later, as I've already mentioned, but by May 1940, the 8th Battalion had issues with availability of light machine guns. I've put this down as might machine guns for some reason. You don't need to know that. But they were having issues gathering light machine guns for the defence of their vulnerable points. Just quick summary here. Number 8, N8, VP N8 was Stoke Holy Cross radar station. N9 was Little Massacre Petrol Depot. N10 was Thetford Petrol Depot, Petrol Supply Depot. N19 I couldn't find, possibly a typo, but it's not listed. N20 Trash Railway Bridge in Norwich, and N21 was Gorleston Pier. N22 was Haysborough. So 3 of these VPs, so number N8, N9 and 10 had no guns, with 4 LMGs required for N8 and 2 each for N9 and N10. Only VP N19, which is the one that I couldn't trace, was well defended with LMGs deployed in the anti-aircraft role, but 2 LMGs were required for land defence. N21 had no LMGs with 2 needed. N22 had no LMGs, but it did have an anti-tank rifle, and it also had 1 mortar, which had no bombs for it. This VP also required 2 LMGs. The battalion at this time had applied for 1,000 rounds for each LMG, but there were shortages of small arms ammunition for rifles at the time, so yeah, this request probably didn't go answered for a while. There was also, you can pause and read this, there was an interesting event at VP N5, which annoyingly isn't provided. The info on this VP isn't providing the documents, annoyingly, but someone was observed photographing a machine gun emplacement at this vulnerable point, and they were reported to the 18th Division, who investigated the matter, but I need to look into what happened with that. Slide 23. Okay. So let's have a look at the VPs of the 8th Battalion, which they defended as of May 1940. They'd been responsible for guarding vulnerable points since their formation, but it's not until May 1940 that they introduced this really nice little table so you can actually read the VPs properly. So by this time, the battalion had a total strength of 48 officers and 1,125 other ranks. So it's a sizable unit and much bigger than a standard infantry battalion, which on paper was meant to be 800 other ranks, for example. The battalion itself comprised 5 companies and 3 reserve platoons. And like I pointed out earlier, they were guarding everything from Gorleston Pier, so coastal work, waterworks defence, operating the, defending various places, railway bridges, and a whole range of vulnerable points within their area of responsibility. But one thing that crops up is the responsibility of T Company for N45, which was the Broads Flotilla. And we're going to take a good look at the Broads Flotilla. So the responsibility of the Broads Flotilla was the responsibility of T Company of the 8th Home Defence Battalion. The Broads Flotilla had 2 officers, 3 warrant officers slash sergeants, and 94 other ranks as of May 1940. The Broads Flotilla itself is actually relatively well known today, but it's well known as being a Home Guard unit. Clearly in 1940, it was not a Home Guard unit. It was one of these ever forgotten Home Defence Battalion companies that operated the Broads Flotilla. So, the following series of images shows what is the Broads Flotilla as it was. These are from the Imperial War Museum collection, references at the bottom. These images are frequently used online and elsewhere. I've seen them in the local newspapers, for example, and stated as showing the Home Guard. They do not. These images were taken in August 1941, and by this time, as we'll see in a second, the unit did not comprise of Home Guard at this time. I found nothing in the 8th Battalion Royal Norfolk Regiment War Diary to show that the Home Guard had any responsibility or any role within the Broads Flotilla from the point from 1939 to December 1941. So, as of August 1941, these troops in the image are going to be members of T Company of the 8th Home Defence Battalion Royal Norfolk Regiment, not Home Guard. Here's the proof. So this location statement from the 6th of August 1941 clearly shows that T Company were operating N45, vulnerable point N45, the Broads Flotilla. at the time these photographs were taken. So the soldiers in the images are definitely not Home Guard, but are the forgotten soldiers of the 8th Home Defence Battalion Royal Norfolk Regiment. At this time, they had 8 officers, 4 warrant officers and /sergeants, and 131 other ranks. So quite a sizable force in its own right. Somewhere in the region of 4 platoons. So here's another image. I really like this one. It shows the 2 boats in operation. This boat, I'm sure that's a technical term. There's here has a Lewis gun on a very interesting anti-aircraft mount. There's also a Royal Navy person, officer. I'm no good with the Royal Navy, but someone could identify him there. And we have these soldiers of the T Company getting into the boats, one with a rifle, and the others, 2 Royal Navy ratings there as well, which is interesting. But yeah, there's some really interesting details in these images. Note the Lewis guns. I think the presence of these Lewis guns is one of the reasons why I think people think these are Home Guard. Obviously, and also alongside the fact that no one knows about the Home Defence Battalion, so people just instantly jump to the Home Guard interpretation based on the weaponry, which we'll see later. So here's a close-up of the Lewis guns on the boat. Note the helmet marking here. I need to get a closer look at that to try and work out what it is, but I do wonder if that's a HD for Home Defence. Not sure. They're also wearing waterproof jackets as well. You've got Royal Navy officer here. Interesting to note with these Lewis guns as well, they're mounted by the looks of it for anti-aircraft defence, but also could obviously engage land defence. There's also Royal Navy ensign there as well. But yeah, these are members of T Company. And another one, we have a soldier of the 8th Battalion on guard with a P17 rifle. Again, this is one of these things, people see the P17 or P14 and instantly think Home Guard. These rifles were issued extensively to the regular Territorial Army and the Home Defence battalions as well, which I'll be looking at in a second. I'll be providing some proof for this. As always with this stuff, check the caption, because very few people apparently do. It states here that the Broads Flotilla, formerly operated by the Navy, has now been taken over by the Army and becomes part of the Army's Navy. The flotilla consists of fast-armed motors which patrol the inland waterways and prepare surprises for any enemy seaplanes that might attempt a landing. 3 of the high-speed motors... Anyway, it does say here, Broads Flotilla, Norfolk Division, 2nd Corps. So the evidence is actually pretty clear there as well. Images taken on the 18th of August 1941. So as always, check your captions. This makes it clear that the Army has taken over the Broads Flotilla from the Navy, apparently. But the Broads Flotilla have been responsibility of the Army since at least May 1940. But I wonder if it was a bit of a story they were trying to weave there. And clearly the Navy were involved in this, possibly from the outcome. So here's a bit of a deep dive looking at the weapons that were issued to the battalion. So this segment here from the battalion's war diary in the 1st of May 1941 shows that the battalion was being armed with rifles chambered in .300. That's the British Army term at the time, not 30-06 or all this stuff. This is what the British Army called it, and that's what I use. So this explains the P17 rifle in those 2 images. Remember, it wasn't just the Home Guard that used weapons chambered in .300 or 300. It's coming to light now that the regular and Territorial Army and now the Home Defence battalions were issued with this ammunition too, and weapons chambered in that ammunition. Below, we also see on the 16th of May that rifles chambered in 300 were issued to the Broads Flotilla. So we can clearly see here that the Broads Flotilla had been issued with likely P17 rifles, which is why they show up in the image. The LMGs that they were using, so likely the .303 automatics, which is likely to be those Lewis guns, were still chambered in 303, which is interesting, but they were left with the Broads Flotilla, possibly because those weapons were already available and already placed in the boat, so there's no point replacing them. Okay. So, one of the key things I don't want to do, though, is completely write off the role of the Home Guard in defence of inland waterways. The key thing I want to do is show the actual role of the Home Guard as was historically, to be as historically accurate as possible, and to make sure that the role of the Home Guard is properly shown at specific points, not this ahistorical view. I want to show, make sure that the LDV and the Home Guard are properly considered from a historical perspective, and not an ahistorical one which broadly focused on assumption and massive simplification. So this is not to say that the Home Guard did not defend inland waterways. So it is likely that the Broads flotilla was responsibility of the full-time professional army due to the proximity of the Broads to occupied Europe and northern Germany, well within aircraft range of seaplanes and the like. So you wouldn't want a less than part-time force defending a key vulnerable waterway and bodies of water vulnerable to attack at any minute. But this is not to say that the Home Guard didn't defend inland waterways. Just the evidence shows that for 1941, the Home Guard, 1941, the Home Guard did not operate the Broads flotilla. They did, however, operate what was termed the King's Lynn Flotilla from July 1940. It's really, really early. So within a month or two of the Home Guard actually being formed, they were assigned their own flotilla operating out of King's Lynn. Here, as a result of this, they were to patrol the area from Lynn to Denver Sluice, so the inland waterways, throughout a period of 24 hours a day, which is really, really interesting, something that needs to be highlighted more because this is a key role. But I assume that this is because the area of these waterways around King's Lynn and inland in the Fens were not under immediate or direct threat as the Norfolk Broads were. But it needs to be highlighted that the Home Guard were doing inland waterway patrols, just not on the Broads at this time, as far as I can see. Also on the 14th of August 1940, we see the Cambridge Flotilla formed as well, and this had a similar task and was purely carried out by the Home Guard. So this role needs to be highlighted, and the actual role of the Home Guard needs to be highlighted in line with what the documents say, not assumption. So we can clearly see that from within a couple of months of the formation of the Home Guard in Cambridge and King's Lynn, they were undertaking a role of inland waterway patrol. It's just there's no evidence to show that they were ever defending part of the Broads flotilla from this period from 1939 to December 1941. The reason why I cut off at December 1941 is because that's where the paper trail ends, but we'll look at that in a second. So as of Christmas Eve, so the 24th of December 1941, the 8th Battalion 8th Home Defence Battalion Royal Norfolk Regiment was still defending the vulnerable points that they had been defending for about 2 years, and they'd been allotted from their call up in August and September 1939. As of this point as well, T Company was still operating the Broads flotilla, possibly because these Home Defence Battalions Home Defence Battalion companies had been formed for very specific defensive tasks. So T Company still operated the Broads flotilla. As of this date, on Christmas Eve, they had 8 officers, 2 warrant officers / sergeants, and 107 other ranks. It's the ink's slightly run there, but it is 107 because it corroborates with other later previous location statements. But now, as of this point of December 1941, they were joined by U Company, which provided 1 officer and 36 other ranks. So also an additional platoon were involved in the Broads flotilla as well. And like I say, all these VPs that the 8th Battalion had been guarding were still consistent as of December 1941. But why do I cut off there? Well, unfortunately, that's where the story of the 8th Home Defence Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment ends. There isn't actually a subsequent war diary available, so I haven't been able to trace a war diary for 1942, so I can't actually trace what happened to them. I also haven't been able to find information on what happened to the Home Defence Battalions in general either. Again, like I said, the Wikipedia page literally just says that they did these tasks and that's it. There's no dates for when they came to an end or what happened to it. So I've done a quick Google search and there's nothing on the Wikipedia about Wikipedia page what happened to them. So I can only guess that they were eventually incorporated into their adjacent TA units or renamed. Annoyingly, I can't find any further information on the 8th Battalion. So I will try and find out what happened to them, but I'm quite sad that the story of these units that were the backbone of the defending the UK and they get ignored due to the Dad's Army School of History. I'm quite sad that the story isn't actually properly told and their work is unacknowledged despite them being what people today think. Despite them doing what people think they're doing what... try that again. Despite the unit doing what people think the Home Guard did today. I'm not going to edit that because I can't be bothered. So it takes a lot of time. I just want to get the video out. So currently there is no end to this story of the National Defence Companies and Home Defence Battalions. And I need to find out what happened to them. So, after all that, hopefully I've shed some light on the Home Defence Battalions, their role and some of the struggles they faced, as well as their general composition. The story of the 8th Battalion is just one of many Home Defence Battalions that struggled to get even basic equipment to undertake their vital role, and whose struggles are now forgotten. So, I hope that gives you some food for thought. Think about the Home Defence Battalions and the National Defence Companies and look into them. I shall catch you all later. Thank you for watching.